Welcome to 15 Minutes of Fact here on WGRNradio.com. Jerry Ashton here, continuing my goal of providing fact-based stories and interviews on the Occupy movement with people who range from on the ground and in the park protesters to academics and social scientists, and everyone in between. The intention is to create an opportunity for the listener, no matter their background, whether it be political leanings, social status, whether they are the 1% or the 99%. But I want everyone to be able to hear directly from the people who will have something to tell us that will help us understand what this movement is all about, who's involved, why it came about, and perhaps even where it is heading. So as economic fairness and the role in government in ensuring that every American has a fair and realistic shot at what we call our American dream happens to be an essential thread in this tapestry, we're fortunate to have as our guest today a citizen journalist, blogger, critic, and cum laude graduate of the NYU School of Law, Ms. Abigail Field. And we will be talking to her from her home on the east end of Long Island. So welcome to the show today, Abigail.
Good morning. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, we're pleased to have you, and I'm sure the listener will too when we go deeper into our subject today. But first, tell us about yourself and how you found yourself coming from getting a degree in geology to entering the field of law, to do work in capital markets and compliance, on to working with public interest groups, and finally to break into journalism by way of writing almost daily columns for AOL's Daily Finance, which appropriately enough for this interview, specialized in covering foreclosure fraud and the mortgage mess. All this, I might add, this career of yours over a period of only 10 years. So why don't you tell us about yourself and how you came to where you are today?
Thank you for that kind introduction. I've always been politically active and aware. My first memory is of that kind of thing is a march down in D.C. when I think I was like 9 years old. So my whole professional career has been mostly about trying to find a way to do good in the world while getting by. And geology was an interest for environmental reasons, but I eventually decided that the environment had a lot of very good defenders. And while it was an incredibly important battle, it wasn't the one I wanted to pour myself into. Some life adventures later, I found myself in law school because law school seemed to be the essential way to get access to jobs where you could really make policy and really make some change in the world if you were going to work from within instead of from the outside on the streets. And unfortunately, law school is very expensive. So I started work right out of law school for a large New York City law firm. And because I didn't want to litigate for a big corporate firm, because I was concerned about who I might be representing, I started in the corporate department. And there I was very lucky to work for a couple of partners who had interesting deals, including this capital markets deal. In the wake of 2000 and, in the wake of 9/11, frankly, a lot of deals fell apart though, and I did end up, in fact, working in the litigation department for a while. I left there to go to New Jersey's Public Interest Research Group. The state PIRGs are not in every state around the nation, but if they're in your state, they are a group to pay attention to. They do a lot of good stuff on behalf of the 99%, to use today's lingo. And for them, I worked on lobbying the New Jersey legislature on the side of consumers on issues ranging from financial privacy and identity theft to prescription drug safety and prescription drug costs to clean elections and how to fix our broken campaign finance system, at least on the state level, and a number of other issues in between.
And then somehow or another you drifted into journalism. How did that come about?
Well, I quit being a public interest lobbyist to be a stay-at-home mom. And that became financially unsustainable, so I needed a new job. But living out in the east end of Long Island, it wasn't so easy to find my way into the kind of public interest work I'd been doing. And through my network, which is how so many opportunities come, I was given the chance to write for AOL's Daily Finance. And Daily Finance was a general business and personal finance page, but they gave me the backing to pursue all things mortgage and banking and foreclosure fraud, because it was during my tenure there that the Robo-Signing scandal broke. And I had, because of being a lawyer and because of my network, I had very good sources in this arena, and I was able to do significant coverage. And from there, I haven't looked back on writing. I found my new niche.
Well, you found a niche which also found me, because I particularly sought you out for this interview because of the writings that you've done for Daily Financial and AOL, Fortune.com, Corporate Secretary Magazine, MSN Money, and of course you have your own blog, which I recently checked in on, called Reality Check. All of this focusing on the mortgage and the banking fiasco that we're in. And by way of an introduction, basically you've introduced the topic I want to bring up, which is going to cause our listeners' ears to perk up, and that's the role of the whistleblower in uncovering these shady, if not totally illegal things that go on behind closed corporate doors. And we both happen to have a favorite person that we've written about separately, the whistleblower who's getting considerable press, and we both know as Linda Almonte. Google that name, listener, Linda Almonte, formerly an assistant vice president at JPMorgan Chase, the lady who filed a lawsuit for wrongful termination almost 18 to 2 months ago, 2 years almost now. And you were one of the earliest journalists to bring her situation to the public's attention, which is how I noticed you. So tell us about how that came about and why you think that this case is grabbing headlines and why it's so important to the general public.
Linda Almonte really is a kind of hero because she has been willing to step forward and speak out about the illegal and deceptive and abusive practices of one of the giant behemoths in our current in our current economy, which is JPMorgan Chase. JPMorgan Chase, like all of the other bailed out banks, acts as if it is above the law. And only when people like Linda Almonte step forward and say, hey, actually, you are violating the law in a number of ways, is there any hope that we can rein in these out-of-control institutions and regain our grip on public policy? So I'm a big fan of her because without people like her, we have no real hope of changing our economic status quo.
Well, it is people like her that are actually even changing the vocabulary of citizen versus big business and bad government. And you used the term Robo-Signing. Linda Almonte is the lady who actually coined that word when she was responding to a reporter's question, I believe it was the New York Times, as to how she might describe that wholesale signing of debt collection affidavits. Can you describe that particular ploy that the banks were using and why it's so wrong?
Sure. Unfortunately that term is a little bit, it's a little unfortunate because it conjures up this ludicrous idea of just people sitting there just signing and signing and signing documents. And while that's true, it doesn't get at the real harm involved. What happens in debt collection cases like, the ones Linda, worked on and oversaw to some extent at Chase, is that the bank is supposed to use its database, figure out how much the consumer owes, prepare a legal document called an affidavit, swear that the borrower actually owes that much money and hasn't been paying it, and then give that affidavit to a court that the court is allowed to rely on as equally good as somebody coming in and swearing under oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So this piece of paper is supposed to replace sworn testimony, and it is supposed to be accurate in every way. Well, according to Linda, what goes on at Chase is makes a mockery of that process in two ways. One way is that the information in the affidavit, like the numbers, like how much is owed, is just wrong. She describes a chilling in her letter that she wrote to the SEC, which I uploaded on Scribd, back when I wrote about her in December of 2010, but you can find it by Googling Almonte SEC letter on Scribd. She details in that letter how the databases are a mess. Information will come in about bankruptcy cases, about loan settlements, about payoffs and the like, and it's supposed to be entered into the database, but it's not.
And I might add, even countersuits by the credit card owner.
Right. I mean, just the data and stuff would just get shredded, in fact, instead of getting entered in the database.
I think that the listener will get a grasp of this when they realize that this is one small portfolio that was being vetted by Linda Almonte, who, by the way, is a Six Sigma black belt in the work that she does, which is not easily come by. But her job was to vet a portfolio for sale to outside collection agencies called debt buyers. These, in my estimation, and they will disagree with me, are the bottom feeders of our industry, because what they do is they go to banks and other institutions and they buy debt. And, of course, when they buy the debt, they want to buy good debt, which means that the affidavits that come along with the debt are supposed to be good, because these people, the debt purchasers, then go into full-fledged debt collection mode, and they start taking people to court, all based on information that Linda found to be incorrect. Now, what happened to Linda when she brought that to the bank's attention, may I ask?
Well, she got fired, but just to be, and that's not what a bank that's committed to having good records and good processes and acting with integrity is supposed to do. It tells you a lot about JPMorgan Chase, that in response to an executive saying, hey, I've reviewed these portfolio files and they are missing all kinds of documents we say that are in there, and I know that these records are inaccurate because I see how you keep your records, and we can't represent that these files contain judgments when they don't, and we can't represent that these amounts are accurate when we know they aren't. And we shouldn't be doing a deal like this. When somebody says these things to the chain of command and they get fired, it tells you a lot about the company that they're working for. Well, but I just wanted to make a small correction.
Yes.
These affidavits that are, filled with misinformation that's important on substance, then get signed by people who don't review them, don't check them. Even if they check them, the underlying database is inaccurate, according to Linda. But they get reviewed and they don't get reviewed. They get signed in massive stacks away from the notaries, and then they get shipped to the notaries, and the notaries sign them without looking at them or checking anything. And that's where the robo-signing dimension comes in. Then these affidavits are used to get a court order, a judgment saying the borrower owes this money. And that judgment can be used to start taking money out of people's paychecks before the paycheck even gets to the person. So these affidavits have a very critical role in bringing the force of the state, the power of law enforcement after these debtors. And if that underlying affidavit is wrong, those people are just totally,
Well, I have a basic moral question to ask about this, and how is it that a bank and its shareholders and its board of directors and all of its layers of so-called competent people, how could they allow something like this to happen? And in the broader sense of the work that you work in, and I want to talk to you now about your website and the work that you're doing, how in the world can we as the American public, number one, allow them to get away with it? And number two, what the hell can we do about it?
All right, you just asked like three questions that I think are all very important. The first question is, how does this stuff go on at banks and shareholders allow it, that sort of a thing? And all I would say is I think that shareholders in general have very poor information about what happened, and there is a huge what's called agency problem. The executives are supposed to be working on behalf of the company, meaning on behalf of the shareholders that own it. But generally speaking, corporate executives at the top end, particularly at these large companies, act in ways that enrich themselves at the expense of shareholders. In fact, Wells Fargo got sued by its shareholders over its mortgage-relating robo-signing practices and all the legal liabilities that have arisen from it, precisely because this kind of conduct at a company damages a company, and shareholders have had to sue.
Let me jump in on that one too. As you know, my background is in the debt collection industry, credit and collections. That's the work that I did, and that's how I was a peer of Linda in this industry, and I was writing blogs about her for industry organizations like Inside Arm and Credit and Collection News. And in my own industry, I was looking for people that would stand up for a fellow professional who was doing the right thing and was getting fired for doing the right thing. And yet I couldn't even get people within this at that point in time. I couldn't get people to rally to her cause. Hopefully that's going to change. But let's go to the point that you talk about with mortgages and foreclosures and how this ties in. Anything that a collection agency has at its disposal, data. These are called files, and they want to collect money on these files. They themselves should be up in arms about the fact that this information is incorrect and putting the entire industry at risk, much less looking like fools and worse for chasing after it. What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, you're right. There is a huge systemic problem that has a lot of risks that have yet to manifest. It's not clear how it's all going to play out, but it's true that there is deep risks built into the system. This gets at the second part of how we got here. America has an incredibly deep anti-debtor bias and a lot of institutional respect for the big banks. When the Robo-Signing scandal started to break, there was a lot of disbelief among our judiciary and our journalism corps and the public at large that the banks could possibly be manufacturing evidence. I mean, and that's what this is. It's not just about lots of little signatures by somebody. It's not even just about the forgery of signing Linda Green's name when you're not Linda Green. It's about creating evidence you don't have to win your cases to collect on debt. And what's been clear on the foreclosure context is it has all of these behaviors in the foreclosure context have their roots in credit card collections, because the stuff Linda saw has been going on for a long time. If you talk to people who defend consumers, there's a law review article done by a guy out of the University of Maryland who looks at the incredible abusiveness of the small claims court procedures that go on against consumers. And there was a report by the New York Times around the time of my story on Linda about how robo-signing is so common in consumer actions. And it turns out that, go ahead.
It seems almost as if this idea of too big to fail permeates the thinking of the bankers, I call them banksters, that they have this God-given belief that they are right no matter what wrong they do and that they will prevail. Are we actually chipping enough? Using your geology background, want to get out your pick and shovel? Are we chipping enough away at their foundation so that they'll finally be brought to terms?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that there has been a tremendous amount of damage to that built-in credibility that I mentioned they had, which was a big part of why they could get away with this for so long. And because they've migrated these practices into the foreclosure world, where you have a lot of very middle-class America suddenly discovering they're being foreclosed on, in really outrageous ways. There is something called a servicer-driven foreclosure, where it's the bank's failure to apply your payments correctly and the bank's larding on of fees it's not supposed to do, and similar behaviors that drives people into foreclosure. I mean, nobody thinks that happens, but actually, in an overwhelming majority of cases, consumer attorneys have documented that the numbers are wrong or there's other errors. So the banks have lost a tremendous amount of institutional credibility, and that's going to continue to happen. But is that enough to change things? No. And the reason it's not is that federal law enforcement, whether it's at the SEC or even worse, the Department of Justice, or at the regulator, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the Federal Reserve, all of those institutions seem to be operating from the premise that the most important thing is to protect these banks' balance sheets. We cannot analyze a problem without focusing first and foremost on protecting these banks as is and making so it looks like they are solvent and profitable institutions. And if that's your perspective, if your perspective is above all else, we have to save these bailed out banks as is, you're never going to get any accountability. And you can see this perspective in the law enforcement world with this new mortgage settlement, right?
Well, I want to remark about that because on your blog called Reality Check, and that's located at abigailcfield.com. Let me spell that out for the listener. ABIGAIL Field, FIELD.com. Your last one had title, Dear State Attorneys General, You Failed America. Yes, you. What motivated you to write that, and tell us more about that?
Well, the reason I wrote that is because the only law enforcement institution that I have any hope reliably is not the right word, that the American public has some justification for believing will act on its behalf when it comes to these issues, when it comes to foreclosure fraud, when it comes to mortgage servicing abuses, when it comes to securities fraud committed by these banks, when it comes to all the criminal behavior that the banks have been committing in this vast arena. My only hope for the American public are our state's attorneys general. The behavior by the Department of Justice and the regulators that I mentioned before has been such that you just can't expect them to do the sort of law enforcement it would take to change things. They've had lots and lots of years now to do real action, and they've gone after small and medium fry, and they've done token, meaningless cases, and that's all so far. So
well,
I've no hope for them. It's
no.
only at the Attorney General level.
Well, the thing that I hope for, Abigail, is based on people like you. And I'd like to draw attention to the fact that even though you're not walking in the streets and marching with the Occupy Wall Street protesters, you're definitely an important element because they want to deal with the truth. Nobody that I'm familiar with in Occupy Wall Street is against profits. They're against unfair profits. They're not against big business. They're against immoral businesses. So,
criminality.
What's that?
I said they're against cheating and criminality and abuse of the system. And I hear you. I am so grateful for Occupy Wall Street. And if this were 15 years ago, I would be in the streets too. I have to find my little way to contribute. But I'm so grateful for them because they have reframed the debate, and they remain a force for preventing control of the narrative by the corporate interests that have so successfully controlled the public policy debate for the last, many years.
Abigail, would you be surprised if I told you that we could actually do 50 hours of fact with you and not 15 minutes?
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to have to draw this particular interview to a close, but I can assure the listener that based on my experience of you in this last few minutes and the work that you're doing and the events that are unfolding around Linda Almonte and other whistleblowers, the feet on the street with the Occupy people that are bringing this to the public's attention without the mainstream media sifting through to not offend the banksters, I can assure the listener that we will be following up with additional segments. So if there's one thing that you would like to have the listener take away from this program, Abigail, what would that be?
Now is the time for action, and one of the most important actions people can take is to talk to their neighbors and educate the people around them, not just the narrow group of friends that they're already comfortable with, that they know well, but as many people as possible by direct face-to-face contact about what's really going on. Only by having an informed electorate can we get real change happening. And that's not going to happen through the TV news. It's going to happen from people who know what's happening, talking to each other. It's the most powerful form of communication possible.
Well, I thank you for that, and I thank the listeners as well for their time and attention to the segment of 15 Minutes of Fact. For the listener wanting to reach Abigail, you will be able to write her at ACF, letters ACF, Reality Check, REALITY check, at yahoo.com. You can locate her on Twitter as Abigail C. Field, as well as locate her on LinkedIn as Abigail Kaplovitz Field, and at her website, of course, AbigailCfield.com. You can find me as well on LinkedIn as Jerry Ashton, on Twitter as @WrittenOffUSA, and also I invite those people who can't geographically, get involved with Occupy Wall Street, to go on LinkedIn and join my group called Occupy Everywhere. So this is Jerry Ashton signing off from WGRNradio.com and 15 Minutes of Fact with this quote from Abraham Lincoln. Freedom is not the right to do what we want, but what we ought to. Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith let us, to the end, dare to do our duty as we understand it.